What's going on, friends, family, people of YouTube? Welcome on into the first ever episode of Sip Talks, where we discuss everything DBD related. Okay, on today's docket, we have toxicity. What does it look like? Does it exist in DBD? We'll answer all those questions. We're also going to talk a little bit about perks and balances inside of the game. As always, if you enjoyed the video, if you like my content, make sure to hop down below where you can like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Make sure notifications are turned on so you do know when I release new content. And I will also include in the description for this video, links to my Twitch, my Twitter, and my Instagram. I stream pretty regularly, a few times a week on Twitch, so make sure to hop on over there for some live discussions. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the video. Alright gamers, first up we got toxicity. Does it exist in DBD? What does it look like? We're going to answer that, okay? Before we do, we have to define toxicity, because I feel like this term is used a little bit too loosely, especially inside of video games. And before you really have any real discussion or argument around a topic, you have to be working from a same set of common terms. In this case, we can just talk about toxicity, okay? So let me define what I think toxic truly means. It might be a little literal, I understand, but bear with me. In regards to DBD in video games, I think toxicity is just any aspect of the game or the community that would allow a potential for a deterioration of the game's life cycle, okay? In short, is there anything that is allowed inside DBD, whether it be an aspect of the game, or, an aspect of, I guess, allowed play style or people that could destroy the game and its appeal over a, short, long period of time, okay? That's what I'm going to work off of. That's going to be my definition of toxicity. So obviously, if you don't really agree, if you think it's a little bit more loose than that, if you just think it's DMs, bad manners, teabagging, etc., that's fine. But realistically, like, if I'm going to look at the word toxicity and apply it to any, like, a video game, I mean, I feel like that's probably one of the worst things that could happen to a game, is that it gets so toxic and the game basically dissolves and it has no appeal and nobody plays it, right? So I'm going to work from that kind of literal definition. Okay, so let's talk about this then, right? Okay. Is there anything in DBD that would resemble that? Is there anything that's allowed? Are there any play styles? Is the game designed in a way that would easily allow toxicity to occur? In short, spoiler alert, no, I don't think so. I don't think it exists. I don't think it's possible. There are maybe a couple things which I'll touch on in a little bit that I guess, could be construed as toxic, could actually, I guess, maybe destroy DBD. But in general, no. I don't think there's anything that exists. I don't think there's anything that's allowed. I don't think there's anything by design in DBD that is toxic. So let's go over some examples, okay? So some of these examples that, might border on toxicity that some of you may have popped into your mind. We'll start with killer, okay? We'll start with killer. What about killers tunneling, camping, mooring, bringing in sweat builds, nodding their head, hitting you on hook? That's all toxic, right? It has to be toxic. I mean, I've seen it in videos. It's toxic. Well, none of that shit is actually toxic, okay? If somebody wants to hit you on hook, if they want to nod, if they want to waste their time camping instead of putting out pressure, that's their prerogative, okay? Usually all those actions have some sort of downside because there's going to be 3 other survivors running around. If they want to tunnel somebody out, while it might not be fun, it might not even be the best option for the killer. But in short, none of that's toxic, okay? So let's go over to Survivor. Let's talk about some things that survivors do that I know a lot of people refer to as toxic, okay? And we actually have some video examples, okay? So let's take a look at these, okay? First one, what about teabagging? Yes, teabagging, control spamming, teabagging the killer. That has to be toxic, right? Well, no, it's just not. Realistically, teabags usually happen what? Crouch spamming happens after a pallet is dropped. So instead of the survivor running away, gaining distance on the killer, they're choosing to sit there and BM. That's fine. As a killer, you just break the pallet and you're that much closer to, ending the chase. Well, what about emoting? Well, emoting is toxic, right? You're telling the killer that you got something on him. No, it's literally just an emote in the game. I mean, there are a lot of games out there that have hundreds of, maybe not hundreds, but multiple emotes or, forms of BM or banter. And those games aren't dead. Emoting, waving, it's the same thing as smacking on hook or shaking your head as a killer. It's not toxic, okay? I assure you, it's not going to destroy the game. Been in the game for years. You'll be fine. If you get pointed at, you'll be fine. Okay, what about blinding at pallets or flashlight clicking? Flashlight clicking. That has to be toxic, right? Well, again, I mean, you're choosing that time to not just run in a straight line or loop a tile efficiently to click your flashlight or blind the killer. You're wasting your item maybe if they're breaking a pallet and you choose to blind them. It's not the smartest play as Survivor because you could be gaining distance. It might be a little bit BM, but you'll be fine. You're not actually going to lose anything as the killer by Survivors doing this. I have another example, okay? Now this one, I think maybe we found something. What about item teching? So stealing your friend's item as they're trying to heal you, not paying attention, okay? Let's take a look, because this, I think this might be toxic. Let's take a look. No! Oh. Well, if Vu doesn't think so, then clearly that's not toxic. Okay, honestly, all memes aside, nothing you can really do in terms of how you play the game out is going to truly be toxic, okay? This game has allowed pretty much hundreds of freedoms of play styles throughout the course of its existence, and the game is still very popular. There's no perks, there's no builds, there's no play styles, there's really no offerings that, in my mind, could destroy DBD. But there is something, however, I will talk about a couple things that you could make an argument for that might actually, open up, kind of lend its way to toxicity towards, the game's kind of, I guess, loss of appeal, if we want to stick with that. Before any of you mention Survive with Friends, Swift, communications, no. 100 times no. Playing a game, even DBD, with your friends, in or out of comms, Discord, it does not matter. That is not toxic. It is not going to cause the downfall of DBD. In fact, it's probably the reason that a lot of people and a lot of survivors play and love DBD. So, Survive with Friends, communications, that ain't it, Chief. Instead, one of the items that you could actually make an argument for being potentially toxic is this little thing right here. The after game chat. This, you can pretty much be a trash bag human right here. You can say whatever you want. You can be racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever you can, just be literally a human dumpster fire. But here's the thing, right? Every game usually has some form of in-game communication, whether it be, text or voice. Those games are still popular, okay? All the games that have some sort of in-game communication, it's not like they just died. And guess what? You can hide the chat. You can hide the chat, or you can just hit continue, leave match, go to the next game. You don't have to stay in the after game scoring screen. You can just go to the next one. You can just keep playing. Don't pay attention to what people say. Say GG, leave. Or just don't show it. But yeah, in short, this game is not toxic. There's really nothing people can do that's toxic. The other item that I want to put attention to, I think this is probably really the only item that you could maybe say is part of the game that might, assist in imploding DBD. And that is the bugs in this game. There's quite a handful of bugs that sometimes are pretty game-changing, that can take a while to get fixed. Usually the ones that aren't game-changing but annoying take quite a while to get fixed and corrected. And we're usually introduced to new or reoccurring or existing bugs with almost every major patch and DLC release. I think that's one of the only things that could be a major downfall of this game, but it's probably almost been an occurrence since the inception of this game, or at least the past couple of years. So clearly it hasn't been enough to deter every player, from even starting up DBD. All right, let's move away from toxicity. I think we've probably talked about it for long enough. Let's talk about balancing in DBD, balances and perks a little bit. Okay, so it should come as a surprise to no one, exactly 0 people, that Dead by Daylight is an asymmetrical game, meaning probably not going to be balanced, right? It's not symmetrical. You have 1 killer, 4 survivors. There's different objectives for the killer as opposed to the survivors. All the perks are different. Powers. Survivors are basically just skins with different teachable perks. How about the most important thing? Killer plays first person, survivor third person, okay? So if we can keep that in mind, it's not hard to understand that this game is probably going to have a wild amount of imbalances if you're comparing survivor to killer. That's just how it is. But you should never really be doing that. We shouldn't be looking at things and comparing them to other things that are across the aisle, killer to survivor. For an example, I don't think we should be taking survivor perks and necessarily comparing them to killer perks, because it's not really taking into account the fact that each side has different objectives. One side has teammates, the others don't. Yeah, I just don't think it lends itself to a meaningful discussion. I think you can maybe look at killer and talk about killer versus survivor on the macro scale, in terms of how powerful one side is versus the other, and maybe try and use little things as examples, but I just don't think it's a really good idea. The most common thing I guess you could point out recently is there has been some discussion that since Pop is getting quote-unquote nerfed, people are saying, oh, what about Decisive Strike? What about Decisive Strike now that Pop's getting nerfed? Well, I mean, to be honest, I don't think that's really a fair conversation starter, because Pop Goes the Weasel isn't really getting nerfed. I mean, it's getting, 15 seconds taken down? But, you only have 45 seconds to use it. Most killers end up using Pop before they start the next chase. I mean, inside of the first 15 to 30 seconds that it's active. It's not even really going to be nerfed. Plus, most killers have moved on to Ruin Undying as their slowdown build of choice. Some people, I consider them cracked, are playing Ruin Undying and Pop. Each their own. Whatever. I don't care. But I think it is weird to now say, oh, well, we need Decisive Strike nerfed because Pop's getting nerfed. Well, first of all, Decisive Strike is a very, very unique perk. It is really the only perk that is built for survivors that is an anti-tunnel perk, whereas Pop is kind of in this pool of gen slowdown, gen pressure, gen regression perks. So I think that's really just an unfair comparison to make. And I just, like I said, I don't think it makes sense to compare things across the aisle. I think if you want to take, for example, survivor perks and compare them to other survivor perks, or killers overall kit in terms of their power, and compare them to other killers kits, builds to builds, from killer to killer, survivor to survivor, I think that's fair. That makes sense. I think it's an easier way to quantify and to balance certain aspects of the game. For example, you take a look at exhaustion perks compared in the past. We obviously know that balanced landing has gotten a nerf. It used to provide you a stagger reduction regardless if you were exhausted or not. Clearly, that was one of the only exhaustion perks. It was the only exhaustion perks that had a multi-use. It had a multi-benefit. It worked whether you were exhausted or not. It was clearly too powerful, thus it eventually nerfed. I think we can look at specific things for one side and compare them to other similar things on that side of the fence. Another good one is maps. You can compare and balance maps to maps. Some maps are bigger, larger, have more pallets, better tile spawn logic, better main buildings. You could take all those things and kind of compare them to, I guess, come to some sort of conclusion as to which map is better. That makes sense. In that way, we can balance certain aspects of DBD, but I think trying to look at DBD on the macro scale and say it's balanced, it's kind of just a generic, yes, killer's in a good spot, survivor's in a good spot. So now that we're starting to kind of talk a little bit about perks, let's talk about perks. Let's talk specifically I want to discuss the labeling of perks. I hate, and yes, I know I'm a survivor, so I might be biased here, but I hate the talk of second chance or crutch perks. I hate it. I hate the labeling. I think it's silly, and I really only dislike it because I think it's just very disingenuous, and it's almost always used as a way to, shit talk a survivor player or a killer player. And the funny thing I see most often is that it's always killers saying, "Oh, survivors in their second chance perks, their crutch perks, etc." But I asked somebody who was pretty adept at killer, how do you define a second chance perk? And they gave me a pretty good definition. I can't recall exactly what it was at the time. I'm like, well, doesn't technically killer have a couple of those? And I know me using Noad as an example of like a second chance perk is pretty weak because Noad's kind of laughable, but still. If you think about it, if you were to define a second chance or crutch perk, survivors have them, killers have them, both sides have them, but what I kind of find funny is if you look at the way the game is designed, survivors are meant to lose in regards to the 1v1. They're not meant to last forever in a chase. They have a finite amount of resources in terms of pallets. They're slower than the killer. The killer gains bloodlust. The survivor is meant to go down if the killer expends enough time chasing them, right? Doesn't it make sense that then a survivor would have tools that resemble something like second chance perks? Survivors aren't dead on the first hook. It makes sense to me that survivors would have in their kit the ability to use perks that give them a second chance at life. Killers are technically the power role. They're the aggressor. It would almost make more sense for killers not to have second chance perks, but I don't really care about the perks in general. I think it's so cringy and silly that, we use those perks to somehow, excuse, I guess, us from making mistakes. A lot of times, killers, after the game, they maybe only got one kill, they didn't get any kills, they played poor, and a lot of times they'll blame the performance on the survivors and their perks when maybe the survivors didn't even use half the perks afforded to them in their build. I think that's one thing that we need to start doing a little bit more is critiquing ourselves and our performance and asking ourselves, like, what did we do wrong? What could we have done better? Instead of just saying, oh my god, your build's so strong and all these crutch and second chance perks carried you. I just don't think it really lends itself to, any growth as a killer or survivor player. As you'll see here in this after game chat, this killer did what most people will not do. They knew, they identified, admitted their own mistakes, and guess what? They're probably going to be a little bit smarter the next time they see somebody in their lobby with a flashlight. But that's all I really wanted to talk about, right? Toxicity, I don't think it exists in DBD. I don't think there's any perks or builds that are toxic. I think, shitting on people for using certain builds, calling them crutch or second chance is just silly and weird to me. I think the game is decently balanced right now. I think it's in a decent spot, minus maybe some specific perks or builds, but the game is always going to be a work in progress, and you're never going to please everyone, you're never going to please both sides. But yeah, I think we can have more of these open kind of discussions or talks. And as I said before, if you have any comments or questions for me, feel free to drop them down below in the comments section or head on over to my Twitter or Twitch live streams and just let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Peace out.